Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast. Today, we have honored to have Meher Zariwala with us, a visionary who's redefining the landscape of corporate innovation and education. Meher plays a pivotal role in the Link team, known for their dedication to designing culture shifting, entrepreneurship training, and open innovation programs. Their work, deeply rooted in design thinking methodology, not only supports but actively enhances the larger startup ecosystem. Mayor has been instrumental in driving internal innovation, focusing on fostering a culture of transformation within organizations to unlock new potentials. In the realm of product innovation, she has been the helm of designing impactful products and services that fuel business growth and sustainability. Moreover, her efforts in open innovation have led to the creation of impactful programs that facilitate meaningful collaborations between startups and corporate organizations aligning perfectly with their goals. Beyond her achievement in fostering corporate and product innovation, Mayor is passionately involved in transforming the future of education. Her pioneering approach to student entrepreneurship and her deep dive in content design, curriculum development, and assessment strategies are revolutionizing how we perceive and engage with learning. By leveraging design thinking across entrepreneurship and open innovation, she is skillfully bridging the gap between theoretical knowledge and its practical application, making her a remarkable figure in both corporate innovation and educational reform. So, without any further ado, let's welcome Meher to our show where we'll be exploring the depth of her experiences and the impactful work she is leading. Hi, Meher, how are you?
Hi, Sagar. First of all, I'm well, and thank you for such a illustrious introduction. Makes me really feel good about the work that I'm doing, and really looking forward to our chat today.
Yes. Man, sometimes, when this introduction happens, right? And when I have interactions with some of the amazing people and they say this, sometimes I wonder, we are so busy in our work, then, seldom we reflect, yes, we are doing something, we are doing. Otherwise, we are so busy in either um, working with the team. So sometimes I feel it's very important to acknowledge our efforts. And I think this is something I just thought I should share before we dive deep. But yeah, this is important, isn't it, Meher?
It is, and it's also when you hear it from somebody else, it is also a great validation for the work that you do, and also motivation to keep working, for to find the exotic between the mundane, like they say.
Absolutely. So, Meher, I have this classic question that I ask all my guests. And what does, when you hear the word future of work, what are the first few things that pop up to your mind?
Um, I think the first thing that comes to me is it's going to be very different from how we understand work today.
Hmm.
It is right now something everybody can only sort of imagine that what's the future going to look like, because so much, just the last sort of 3 years, when we were all in between a pandemic, has normalized so many things using technology, which none of us imagined could be possible. Whether it's remote work, whether it's using any kind of online platforms for communicating, doing constant Zoom meetings, and working across different geographical locations has normalized so much. And now that we have, of course, this big, bad, unknown, but also very exciting phase of AI entering all of our lives, that's also going to somehow play a big role. So for me, future of work is something that we need to redefine and reimagine, and need to keep up with it, because otherwise it's going to ask us to really shift the way we've been thinking about work.
Yeah, yeah. Where just wanted to quickly understand the difference between product innovation, open innovation, corporate innovation. Sometimes it's slightly confusing. So it would be great starting point to deep dive on this topic.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking that since you gave that in my intro, it would be nice for us to actually talk about all three of these things. I'd like to actually first start with saying that any large organization is innovation is no longer a side project. It's no longer something which is a choice. It has become very integral to the DNA of any organization. And all large organizations, whether they are in the list of the top 30 best in the world, or it is a startup which has just got its first round of funding, all of them are constantly dedicating their thoughts and their teams to this entire idea of innovation. Now, there are, of course, traditional models of innovation that have been happening from time immemorial. So, we've seen large companies build what they call their own internal research and development muscle, whether it starts as a small team or whether they have an entire R&D campus, like say Biocon has it. So, they always have constantly been wanting to say that we need to constantly think about what's next, what's new. But that's what's been happening traditionally. Then the entire wave of the startup happened. And the words like unicorn was no longer part of storybooks, but it became part of our entire startup ecosystem in itself. That's when the entire corporate organizations also started thinking about different models of innovation. One of them, and I'd like to first talk about, is open innovation, where the word says it all, where this is we open our doors and we allow innovation to come inside. What that essentially on the ground means is that there are a lot of ventures, startup founders, startups themselves who might be solving the problems that we have internally in a much more agile, in a much more innovative way outside. So, innovation essentially opens its doors and says, okay, let's go outside, look for these innovators and their ideas, and invite them to come inside and co create, co build with these uh, founding teams. So, that essentially is open innovation. Then we have, of course, product innovation. Again, like I said, maybe R&D teams are working on how can we come up with the next best version of the products or come up with an entire new product line in itself. But again, corporates are thinking about how can we really think about taking inspiration as what is happening outside, using principles of new product design. So whether it is design principles, whether it's service design, whether it's design thinking, more user centric thinking behind a new product. Because we have a lot of stories of large companies putting in a lot of money, coming up with a new product, but the adoption outside becomes a question mark. So companies are rethinking the way we do product innovation. And as an organization like Link, we go inside and we really work with their internal teams and says, okay, could you start thinking about it as a small incubator or a small design team, which works and focuses on, first of all, definitely making that product very user centric and doing enough amount of research, but in a very quick, agile way, coming up with products and then going out and testing it into the potential users of that, iterating it constantly using that feedback until you have a product that can go out into the market. And lastly, you said internal innovation, and that really connects to what we're going to be talking about today, which is the future of work, where a lot of organizations are saying that this entire idea of entrepreneurship in itself needs to come into our organizations, and it's called intrapreneurship. So that's why it's called internally innovating, where they're saying it's all good and fine to have startups come in and help us, but what if our own employees, our own teams themselves start thinking and behaving like startup teams?
Yeah.
So the focus in internal innovation is a lot on mindset. It's a lot about the change mindset. How do we really, though we're part of a very large system, but still, how do we still behave like startups do in terms of agility, in terms of being open to feedback and quickly pivoting? So internal innovation is essentially that.
Yeah. Meher, before we go into the internal innovation, I just wanted to understand. You also mentioned about one very important word you used was behavior, right? Now, at the moment, I would like to make some unpopular statements here so that you share what is your perspective here. Okay, there's a lot of hustling happening in the startup ecosystem where founders are working, and I think uh, you know they are they're they're structuring themselves in a way where, of course, they have to find new customers, they have to find investors, and that hustle journey, in the hustle journey, they're unable to manage their work life, whatever you call balance, their health, their sleep, their uh, their insecurities. See, there is a solution, of course. Then there is a support system which is out there now. And the reason I'm sharing this is that there are a lot of organizations in India. Okay, not I'm not only referring to corporates, but let's say SMEs, MSMEs here. Again, there is a work culture where people are working 8 hours, 12 hours in a similar, culture where they have to deliver, the kind of systems they are in. Okay. Now, Mayor, how, if this particular behavior is there, and I think, I mean, I'm not sure how many people talk about this, but I would love to know more from you. Like with this being a very, unsaid roadblock. So how do one solve for this? And I would love to hear your thoughts. And then what are some of the action steps that can be taken, to have the right mindset or the behavioral shift?
So, Sagar, is your question more from this challenge which is there in a large organization or in startups or both?
In in startups, the challenge is they're hustling and they have to like they're just doing about anything which is not
Yeah,
supporting their own growth in that
yeah,
context. And even in organizations, not only corporates but SMEs or any other organization where they are working like 8-12 hours and they are
yeah.
just glued to their work. So this is, I feel, a roadblock. So yeah.
Yeah. So I like to actually first talk about what I'm working most closely with is how
Sure.
the corporate organizations are matching it, and then maybe I'll talk about from the startup perspective
Sure.
and maybe reflect back on my startup days,
Yeah.
when I was doing it. So I think in the entire corporate world there is of course a lot more conversation about work life balance, although in the recent times we do have some sort of unpopular opinions that people
Yeah.
should work maybe 6 hours, 6 days a week, and everybody should come back to work and things like that. Um, but I think if you go into any of the surveys, like the great places to work, and if you look at what those reports really say, people really like employees really want to work in spaces or in companies which provide that kind of work life, balance,
Hmm.
and also create the environment for that kind of like work life balance within, like, say, the campuses that they are in.
Hmm.
So respecting, whether it is downtime, which could be social time or lunch time or things like that. So a lot of sort of policies and a lot of sort of cultures are getting developed around this entire thing of work life balance in the corporate world, although there would be some corporates who are saying, we should actually behave like how startups are, where we're constantly working and there is this whole concept of work life balance that
Yeah.
should not be existing. um I think it just gets, it's a little unpopular, so it gets a lot more sort of screen time than it should. But most organizations are constantly thinking about how we can create more spaces, and I think you see that, like, I'd like to mention two organizations which do that. Like Amdocs is one organization that I've seen, really does that a lot. And if you see, most of the people who've been working there have actually sometimes spent 12 years, 13 years. I met somebody last week who had spent 20 years there. So I think that's because they felt that a kind of work life balance was created. I also feel that, I think, it depends where you are in the entire hierarchy inside a large organization also. I think I do see a lot of young people who join in. They are, of course, feeling that, our work life balance is a little skewed, because I think as you grow higher and higher, you have a team which is doing a lot of work while you are managing that team. And so the pressures on, I think, people who just join in work is a lot more. Are we doing enough to make them feel think? I don't think so. My frank opinion would be like we should spend a lot more time on the junior resources and seeing how we can sort of help them manage their work better, manage their time better. Because the people who have spent, a decade or more have actually somehow mastered this thing about creating that balance, managing their time and their responsibilities. I think young people joining work require that a lot more, helping them to think through that and creating systems, helping them to create their own systems on how I can manage, these things better. So rather than working harder, how can we work smarter? is something I think definitely managers, leaders can spend a lot more time, talking about. That I think is from a corporate perspective. From a startup perspective, I don't know if I have the answer for it, because I think when I had my startup also, my entire life was my startup. I was constantly working, but I never felt that I needed work life balance, because I think most people start their businesses because they're really passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
education was my passion. So if I was constantly doing that and I was spending a lot of time at work, I was not thinking about, like, now it's 6 o'clock, I need to kind of go home, kind of stuff. I wanted to do that, and even the team that was then sort of getting gravitated around my, was somebody who was passionate about education, and
yeah,
everybody was wanting to spend more time, but we felt a lot more connected. There was so much more time we were bonding with. I think the adversity that is there inside startups, by adversity I mean you have low resources, you are really pitching for maybe a proposal. All of that is an adversity which brings teams together, and that's how, and they say, right, adversity really creates tribes. So
hmm,
I think tribes get, really created in this entire thing. So that's been, of course, my experience. But I do work, when you go to any of the co-working spaces, I see now these new teams. And I do feel that a lot of startup founders have also started realizing that that's not the best model. And they need to carve out separate times, that there is a life beyond their startups also. So there is, of course, it's more self-regulation, because you don't
yeah,
have a manager or you don't have a boss who can really help you with that,
yeah,
but kind of creating that self regulation for yourself and then for the team that you build around you also.
yeah. Meher, why I asked you this question is that fundamentally, uh, we are talking about innovation, right? And the bed in which innovation can happen. Of
Yeah,
course, you need the skill, you need the talent, you need the hunger, you need the intent. Uh, you know, you need to be obsessed with a problem. I completely understand that. But then, for innovation to actually happen, there has to be an inner atmosphere as well as the outer atmosphere. A lot
true.
of support systems are definitely addressing the outer atmosphere, but in the culture itself, where we
Yeah,
expect corporate innovation to happen, and
yeah,
even startups to innovate and support the global challenges.
yeah,
So that's where my I was like, okay, like what are some of the systems or structures or some suggestions you can share? And see, this is like this is more like a, not a question, but a perspective, that
yeah,
I
yeah,
have gained in the last 7-8 years, understanding, okay, what is happening in the inner side. And
true.
where, in your experience interacting with corporates, what have you seen some shifts, or what are some of the shifts you expect to happen, where innovation can happen from an inner atmosphere point of view?
Yeah. So, every time I run a internal innovation or a innovation mindset workshop, I'll always have one person who will come to me at the end of it and says, okay, but how can I come up with more ideas? And how can I become more innovative, right? So generally in these workshops, we would have gone through the entire process and we would have taught them on how to, like, think about the problem, build the idea, prototype it, and go through that entire cycle in 2 to 3 days. But I think what people are focusing, and this is the answer I give everybody at the end of
Sure,
it,
sure.
is, you're asking the wrong question when you're saying, from an inner mind perspective, the question that inner mind is asking is, how can I come up with a lot more innovative ideas? And I keep telling them that, what you need to really shift your focus to is, how can my mind constantly actually look around me and see what are the problems happening, and think about each of those problems as an opportunity.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
shifting yourself from this, I need to come up with an innovative idea, to thinking about, so I'm walking down the road and maybe I'm just taking a walk, but at inside my community where I'm living, but I'm always seeing maybe garbage getting collected for some reason in that corner. So, seeing that as not as something as, oh my god, this is always a constant problem, but thinking about it is, okay, is that an opportunity? Can we interestingly think about solving it? I'll give you another anecdote about it. The we all have the entire swipe function on our mobile, phones. I think before the swipe functionality in our lives, butt dialing or your phone actually making calls for you, was a big thing. So
Mm-hmm.
somebody I forget the name of the engineer who was thinking about it, but he was taking a flight and he went into the in-flight washroom, and he realized that once he went in, it was so easy to lock and unlock the entire door because it was just a swipe,
Yeah.
right? And that is what
Mm-hmm.
actually inspired them to say, can we use that functionality in the swipe function of Apple?
Mm-hmm.
So he was conscious. He's not, now you're just taking a flight, but you see his inner mind, and that was your question. His inner mind has now reached this phase where he's looking at everything around him as actually inspiration for ideas. He's also looking everything around and saying that, okay, if this system or this product is not working, could I see that as an opportunity? So staying with the problem, looking all around you, and saying that, those problems excite me because each of those problems are going to become potential opportunities. I think that is the mindset which I'm constantly talking to people about. And after saying all of this, I want to say it's really, really difficult. That's why we have such few people who are really called innovators, right? Because naturally, our mind is designed to think about solutions. Our mind is always is gravitating towards, okay, so maybe we should solve it like this, or maybe we should solve it like that. And just, I think the step one is awareness that, okay, what did I just do? I again started going into idea mode, right? So for me, that would be the baby steps. First, awareness that, okay, as soon as I saw something which is not good, what did I do? I thought about, okay, this is how I should solve it. One is awareness of that. And from there, saying, okay, now that I'm aware, could I then say, not think about an idea, but can I ask, why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? Why is that the problem? Constantly going deeper into what is actually causing that problem. I think if we can go take our mind to that state of awareness and then action, that is a very fertile bed. Not just at work, but everywhere else, you will start seeing life, much differently.
Wonderful, wonderful, Meher. Thank you for sharing that. But if any startup founder is watching this podcast right now, is listening to us, and they want to bag a project by the corporate houses, what are some of the basics? Because I'm sure they would have a solution to offer, but what are some of the gaps they can get ready themselves on, or they can work before they reach out to Link, or before they reach out to corporation? What are some of the key things that you would like to share with them?
Sure. So corporates and startups both think about this a lot. Both want to work with each other. But it is like one of those Chetan Bhagat books, I'm forgetting it now, where the boy and the girl are all from very different worlds and they come together. So
Two
this, so
states.
exactly, yes, two states. Thanks, Sagar. Yeah. So startups and corporates are like that. They belong to two different states. I think what makes a startup unique is that they are agile, that they're not thinking too much about processes. They're not thinking a
Hmm.
lot about detailing out a lot of things. They're not thinking about legalities and stuff like that. They're saying, okay, there is a problem. Let me go deeper into the problem. Let me start solving for that. So that, of course, is something that corporates really admire, and that's what we want corporates to really inculcate into their lives. Excuse me. But I think once the startup comes in, and this is what startups should really be thinking about, is I think in order to get into a partnership with the corporate, sometimes they balloon the reality of where they are. So for example, corporates will
Hmm.
always tell me that a startup might be at TRL maybe 2 or 3, but they'll say that we are at TRL 5, right? So I mean, I understand from, there is the hustle nature that is there, but I think the hustle needs to be married with some amount of objectivity when a corporate and a startup work starts together.
Hmm.
They need to really say, be truthful about where they are in terms of technology, where they are in terms of their teams. And I think even investors are asking that of startups right now. Tell us
Hmm.
what is the truth. Otherwise, where we're all going to kind of end up. So startups need to, of course, be a lot more transparent about where they are. The second is, once you get into a partnership with the entire corporate world, you will have to make your peace with some amount of processes, some amount of getting yourself a lot more organized than what you're used to in a startup world.
Hmm.
Because whatever, there will be an innovation team inside a large corporate. There will be one innovation team that you will be working with, but there are different teams within that large corporate organization that you want to work with. Different business units. You need to work with the legal team, the procurement team. All of these teams are the other teams that you need to work with. And inside a large corporate, there are checks, balances, systems.
Hmm.
Of course, we try to simplify it for the startup world, but you will have to go through that entire process with the large corporates. So be prepared for that, to do a little bit of boring, rigorous, process-oriented preparation for yourself. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And where I would also wanted to address from the corporate front that,
yeah.
what are some of the areas where they can be. I know we're talking about open innovation, but yes, they can be open-minded in terms
Oh,
of
yeah,
working
yeah,
with
yeah. Of
startups.
course. Of course, it's nice to see open innovation. It looks great inside our annual report that, we did open innovation and we had so many startups. But these are systems. And so how I tell startups to, like, what I said about like startups having to adjust to these systems, we are actually pushing corporates a lot more because we are more pro. Though corporates are our client, we are saying startups are smaller, their resources are smaller, and so we need to be more empathetic towards the startup teams that come in. Whereas the corporates have a lot more resources. So we tell them that you might have certain processes, which is, for example, vendor onboarding for others, but for startups, you need to tailor make them, you need to simplify them. Uh, and So, one is, of course, we tell their processes to get simplified. We also, I think there is a lot of mindset that we are also working in the corporate sites, where we're telling the different teams that I just mentioned to start saying that this agility that startups bring in, you need to also take that agility. So we're constantly pushing the startup corporate teams to be quicker, faster, more agile, move much faster, like how startups are moving, rather than saying, okay, we'll take 2 weeks to do any XYZ kind of um, process that needs to be done. So yes, so I think asking them, it's like that's why it's coming to a midpoint where processes from the corporate sides need to get simplifier and faster. Teams need to be more in the mindset that this is a startup, so we can't expect them to be 100% pakka in everything. We need to help them to bring all of these things. And I think one of the biggest thing that helps in this entire thing is a buy-in for open innovation from the leadership. So if you have somebody from upper management who is also understands this entire mindset that needs to come and talks to the teams to really be open, to be more flexible with startups, then that really helps. Of course, all of this is easier said than done, but it's a constant year on year. And we see that, like, the first year that you start an open innovation program compared to year 5 for any large organization, it's much different because slowly that culture has started imbibing in people who are inside. So it's a slow process. And that's why a lot of people say that innovation is a long game. And because it's not just about what startups you worked with and what kind of prototypes or products came out, but the kind of mindset that change happens over, say, these 3 or 5 years of the employees inside is also very, very important.
Interesting, interesting. Where one question on the human side, when such a collaboration is happening, we have seen, we discuss issues between co-founders, we discuss issues that are happening in the early stage between the key team members. How does the link team manages the people issues or the ego issues that comes up? Because I think that is also something that happens in this unique collaboration that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's why actually we call ourselves Link, because I've been so many
Nice.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, because so many times, I've been in a call with startups and I says, yes, that, corporates are like that. Their
Mm.
systems are like that. So I'm trying to help them empathize with the corporates, but I'm saying, yes, don't worry, we're going to fight your case and get you what is, due for you. And then similarly for the corporates, which is slightly tougher, where we tell them that, look, we know that, you are this super giant of a large organization, but you need to be also more charitable, more open when you're working with these guys. Putting them in a room is never a good idea, but I think really conversing with each one, trying to sort of hear their sides out, and then communicating that to each, to each side, and trying to bring them to like a center point. But so saying, there are some really great relationships that also get formed without any links intervention, because there's a certain amount of maturity which is there from startups, and there are some really open leaders which are sitting in these large organizations. So some really very healthy relationships have also been formed without much interventions from us. It's all based on the people who
Mhm.
is part of the innovation team on the corporate side, and who is the person from the startup who's been nominated, to run this project, because egos are there on both sides.
Yeah. So, Mer, what are some of the few skills or observations that you would like to share where a startup founder must
Hmm.
focus at? When it comes to working with a process driven approach and process driven organizations such as corporates.
So I think one is, I think, maturity, right? Like, I think when we're looking at open innovation, most, and here when I say open innovation, here these are corporates who are ready to actually put in a lot of financial and technical resources to start working with the startup and their idea. So I think a certain amount of maturity is required. I think a lot of startups come to us where their idea is extremely nascent, and then they say that, I would like this corporate to start sort of supporting us or working with us. I think you need to be slightly more mature when you're actually working with corporates, and your product and idea should be more mature. So I think, I feel rather than just going to an investor, startups should really think about it from a perspective that corporates not only offer you, of course, the financial benefits into your startups, but they also bring in, like, say, technical resources. So maybe they have an entire tech lab where you can build better products.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have subject matter experts, right? Researchers, technical researchers who can help you really take your idea to the next level. And finally, they have access to, um, what we say, market access. So they have so many potential clients which your idea can go to. So all of these things is what the corporate is offering. What the startups really need to take as baby steps is say that, am I mature enough, and do I have the patience? Because startups want to very quickly move through these things. Have a little bit patience on saying that first the startup will start work, corporate will work with you, they will test it out, maybe you'll build a prototype. Then you'll actually take that prototype to a much more mature level, test it with few customers. So it's a longer kind of cycle. But like I said, there are a couple of benefits also, like market access, technical resources. So patience and maturity, I think, is what both startups are two things startups should have when working with corporates.
Thank you, Meher, for addressing that. Well, entrepreneurship is something, yes, we have spoken about entrepreneurship everywhere we see, whatever on social media channels, be it the Shark Tanks, they're seeing entrepreneurship. But I think entrepreneurship is also one area where you are also working and contributing and you have your expertise. So, what makes a good entrepreneur? What are the qualities of a good entrepreneur?
I think I think I said this before. First of all, identifying the right problem, right, internally
Mhm.
also. I think what happens is, and I think a lot of us might be guilty of this. Like, we go to our corporate jobs, and we're waiting for the weekend to come in, and we're always thinking about what are my sort of KPIs or KRAs that I need to really focus on. I think from your the topic that you're talking about, also from a future of work, what people really need to start thinking about is, in the future everybody will be expected to have this kind of entrepreneurial mindset, although they're working in a large organization,
Yeah,
I feel.
yeah,
And I think thinking about it, that, oh, I'm not really getting paid, so why should I do something extra? I think that we need to throw out of the window, um, because there are this is a long game, and it is both beneficial for you as well as for the organization. We shouldn't think that the corporate is going to take our ideas and run away. right? And what am
Mm,
I going to
yeah.
get in return of that? A really good example of that is the Sony PlayStation example, and I'm sure you know that story. So essentially, Ken Katargi was watching who was an electric engineer at Sony, was really looking at his daughter play with Nintendo, and he kept thinking that something's not right. He really didn't like the sound of it, and he started sort of consulting with Nintendo, wanting to improve this entire video gaming console that they had. Of course, Sony found out, and they wanted to really fire him because he was working with Sony. But somebody, and his actually it was his manager, who said that, actually maybe we should allow him to hustle with this inside Sony. And he started building it, and of course, it took him, a couple of years to convince everybody. But that's how he started working with what we today know as the Sony PlayStation, which got first he developed it, and he tried to sell that idea inside, then he tested it with few people, and of course, rest is history, right? We all know about the PlayStation. And today he had an entire team around him, which then ran PlayStation, and then eventually he was the CEO of Sony also. So I think there is the long game that he was playing. Like, he was hustling, and though he was doing his full-time job at Sony, he thought that he should hustle with video gaming also. Now, did he get paid for that? Maybe not. Did he get extra bonus for that? Maybe not. But I think that kind of mindset, that I there is a problem, and that is really sort of stuck in my head, and I want to go after it, is what the mindset, I think, of entrepreneurship is. And thinking about it from a long term perspective, because if you're a problem solver in this organization, you're a problem solver everywhere, and that
Yeah.
mindset is with you everywhere that you go. So yeah, maybe I'm repeating myself, but yeah, I think I thought a story would
No,
help.
no, no. No, good, good, Meher. I think that definitely helps.
Yeah.
Just an observation here. I mean, with respect to, let's say, India, okay, now it's a continent in itself. Everyone has their own, I mean, the way they have evolved, be it their own social factors, psychological factors, economic factors, several factors, how easy or difficult it is to develop or cultivate this mindset. And
Hmm.
of course, there is one set of people who are aware, who are hustling, but there is a larger chunk, be it in corporates or even in teams. I think, let's say, a major chunk are the employees, right? Now,
Yeah.
how easy or difficult it is, and what are some of the action steps? Let's say someone who is watching and he's like, I am not like this. I struggle with this. Why should I do this? So what are some of
Yeah.
your thoughts? It would be great if you could.
Yeah, so I think, from a employee perspective, I'm going to answer that, and then from an employer.
Sure.
So you're right, like, there is also a culture, different cultures in different organizations, and also locations. There might be some organizations where it's very, very okay to just express your ideas, or which could be out of the blue in some certain meetings. But in certain organizations, maybe that's not the culture, and even if that is a culture, some employees might be a little reticent, or what people say, that you're not outgoing enough to say those things, but they do have a great idea. I do feel that in that cases, what really helps is if you can really build maybe one or two sort of an inner circle. It could be either your own sort of co-workers, or some friends, or it could even be your manager if you have a great relationship with them, to really start taking, like, here is something that is there, that's on my mind, and I'm thinking this is the problem, and I want to think about an idea for it. So I think what we really don't spend time for is, once we have identified a problem, how do you go and validate it from people? You'll have
Hmm.
a lot of people who will talk about, here is my idea, give me your opinion. But people don't spend enough time on the problem validation. So I think, even if you're a little reticent, if you can maybe do one-on-one conversations to people, and says, do you think it's a problem, do you think it's a problem, and you have enough people excited about the problem, it will give you motivation enough to say, maybe I should solve for it.
Hmm.
Right? So I think doing that kind of one-on-one conversation with people, it could be a smaller group, whoever you're comfortable with, really helps as a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, in startups, there are a set of people. Let's say there are hustlers. There are people who go out. They're upfront. They're upbeat. They want to kind of sell the product. They want to go out and talk about their stuff. And there is another set of people which are critical. Let's say a lot of
Yeah,
technology startups that have come up, CTOs, and we all are aware how difficult it is to find a CTO for a startup founder or a startup team, right?
right.
And you mentioned a couple of points on communication and those interpersonal skills. One is, knowing I have to have a one-on-one conversation, and one is actually going out and doing it. So,
Right.
what are some of the action steps one can take if they want to really become uh, a good communicator, and create a atmosphere where trust and authenticity, reflects, because that's where, because ultimately, be it a startup journey within themselves or startup corporate journey, trust and authenticity has to establish. And I understand,
Yeah.
Link would be doing that, but then what startups and corporates can do to build or weave this together.
I mean, if your question is like, I think your first part of the question was like, if I'm a startup, how do I even go and have
uh,
that conversation if I'm not feeling
yes,
safe? So
yes.
I feel, and I think we are losing this art of this. I think, why, if I have already a built relationship, and I think you and me have done it, right? Like if I'm thinking about something, I'll say, Sagar, will you be able to help me with this? Right now, why am I able to do it is because maybe I have actually invested at some point where I've said that you and me have just spoken to each other without any agenda,
Hmm.
just to catch up and just to say that what's been happening in each other's lives. I think whether it is from a corporate perspective or a startup perspective, sometimes just meeting people without an agenda is the start point of having good relationships who you can take your ideas to.
Yeah,
Right, so
yeah,
I think without an agenda, if you feel that these are the people who I think will at some point help me, listen to me, or maybe become part of my network. I think people should invest in that without an agenda, just have conversations, whether even if it's 15 minutes, get to know those people, what is their stories, what is happening in people's lives. If you show interest in that, I think then when you go back to those same people and says, I'm working on a problem or I have an idea, then those people are a lot more open to actually listening to you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the other side, where how does startups and corporate create that trust and establish an authentic relationships amongst themselves?
Hmm. Um, like I said, I think from a corporate perspective, they would like a lot more transparency from the startups rather than the startup, trying to hustle their way in. And on the contrary, I think for corporates, and we are constantly telling corporates is, don't treat startups as your vendors. So how they would
Hmm.
say, okay, so what the corporate will generally do is, okay, I invoice somebody and I want X number of samples to come in, right? That's how they would treat a vendor. But a startup is not your vendor. So that trust building needs to happen where I start looking at the startup not as a vendor, but as somebody who comes with a lot more. Of course, they come up with those samples or the idea that you want, but they also come with a certain amount of mindset. They come from a certain amount of knowledge they have of the ecosystem. Okay, currently, what is happening? What are the trends outside happening? They are meeting other founders, they are meeting VCs. So they come with a lot of value addition. And so corporates need to start looking at them with that value addition rather than just as vendors. And that really creates a trust, that kind of respect if a corporate gives to the startup. And from a startup, like I said, if they are really hustling or not being truthful, then there is no trust that can be, really communicated and built with the corporate.
Where can you share a story that is really that you are really inspired by, or the project of Link that you're really inspired by? I mean, it's okay if you do not take the name. I'm completely okay with that. But still, if you would like to share, it would be wonderful.
Like a corporate startup kind of
Yeah, corporate
story.
startup partnership. Yeah, that you are personally extremely proud of.
Yeah, so I think I'll have to think of a good example. Um, I'd like to actually talk about like a sports company that we are really working with, and there was a startup which started working with them, and though they started working on one a specific use case or a problem, while they were doing that entire use case and solving for it, they were visiting the warehouses of this large sports company, a lot. And during that entire thing, there was another problem that got identified, which even the corporate had not thought about.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of serendipity when it really happened with this startup, and then they could also sort of start building solutions for that. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
that was like truly sort of agile and very exciting innovation or collaboration, because that's why we say that you invite the startup to come to your kind of space, because they will be able to see some things and say, I know how to solve this. Although the corporate innovation team was sitting inside that space but was not seeing that problem as an opportunity. So for me, that was exciting to see this kind of serendipitous collaboration happening.
Wow, wow. Man, a lot of support system in form of incubation is happening in India in the last
Yeah.
4 5 years, and we are seeing a lot of incubators coming in. So, uh, what stage a startup should be, right? Because the startups are now applying to a lot of government incubators, which I think there are some
Hmm.
schemes that are happening, right? So, who
Yeah.
are the right startups to come and seek support at Link?
So, like I said, they should be a slightly more mature one. So, for example, what our incubators are supporting is maybe you could be a startup with an idea.
Hmm.
And that idea might be in prototype stage, or it might be ready to go into market, but you don't have many, say, early adopters for it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas the accelerators are really looking at, okay, you've got early adopters, but you need that next jump that needs to happen. um I think for us it is the second one, where you've got your product, you've got some customers, you've tested it out, and you also have enough feedback that you've used to really improve that product. You need not be funded or invested particularly, but if your idea has already seen some amount of traction, that is good enough. But I think for us, more than the stage of the startups, I think it's very, very specific to a use case. So, without mentioning the corporate, but I'd like to say, like, for example, if you're looking at, say, connected vehicles, and within connected vehicles, we are looking at, say, the ADAS system, and within that maybe there is a device which is getting heated. So corporates will look at a startup which can actually reduce that kind of heating happening inside that larger system. So they're also looking at extremely specific use cases and how startups can solve for it. Unlike, say, an accelerator or a VC will say, okay, whatever is your entire idea, we're going to adopt it and support it. A corporate is very specifically looking at a very maybe small part of your solution to come and solve their problem,
Mhm.
right? So you should be also somebody who knows your technology well, who has the patience and the intellectual capacity to understand that specific use case of the corporate, and then say, okay, I have a solution, or I will mold my solution so that it solves for that specific use case.
Interesting, interesting. So, Meher, you have been a startup founder yourself, and now you are supporting startups to become process oriented. And I know
Yeah,
in the journey, you have seen
yeah,
a journey yourself from being a hustler to now leading a process driven mechanism for startups.
yeah.
So, what are some of your learnings that you would like to share? And it would be wonderful to hear that.
So I think my entire startup was in the entire education space,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
this was before the days when apps and technology and ed tech became like a big thing. But I think some of the things doesn't change. I think having your first early adopters, getting market traction. I think that was something that we focused also when I had my entire venture. But I think when you're in something like education, Then you also have a certain amount of emotions because these are young people. This is learning, and this is so much about what the future outputs is going to be, right? Of what impact that you have. So I think what I really learned is that impact driven businesses are not going to scale as much as all the other kind of businesses that are happening. um, and I think you need to somehow, somewhere you will have to give up on impact, purpose, and drive, especially if you are in social driven businesses. You'll either have to give that up, or you will have to give up scale and profits, right? So having both of them together and running an ethical kind of business, in such cases it becomes difficult. um, and maybe but there are other businesses, whether it's e-commerce or other things, in which there is not such a large thing about impact and social issues and such like that. There a lot more scale can happen. So going back, if somebody had told me 10 years ago if I would ever again go back, I think I would have still wanted to start an education business because I was passionate about that. um, but I think I learned it the hard way that scale will not come easy when certain things you're passionate about. So yeah, that was my learning.
So I think we discussed the future of work. Now I would love to know more about future of innovation and future of corporate innovation.
um, I think I think it's where the future is really moving towards in the entire space of innovation. Like I said, is that internal innovation, like teams
Mm-hmm.
internally focusing a lot on coming up with new products and new ideas is definitely going to take a lot more. Um, and that's because I think we have so many success stories of such large companies. I mean, like I mentioned about the entire PlayStation kind of stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think large organization wants that, right? Like I think Amazon Prime is something that we all use now, but that is something that came in internally by a group of employees at Prime who said
Wow.
that that is something that we feel that people would want faster delivery and somebody will pay for it. Similarly, I think if you know the e-chopal story of ITC, where they
Mm-hmm.
wanted the middleman to be removed. Now that was again something that internal employees at ITC was really looking at. And I mean, and then Google has a concept, right? It has something called the 20% off time. So it is actually providing, it is accounting in its entire sort of um, employees time, that they will be taking 20% off to think about innovation.
Hmm.
And it is dedicated and given to them to do that. So I think in terms of that, I feel a lot more corporate organizations are going to invest a lot more to either create systems, processes like Google has done, or other companies, so that their own employees, because they understand the systems a lot, how can we give them the right environment and resources to come up with innovations. And I think a lot of organizations are already doing it. Like, for example, Adani has their entire platform called Manthan, and they run like an annual innovation challenge. Most of the companies have now sort of create a very organized system where they'll put out problem statements, they will ask employees to form teams. Internal, it's basically like internal challenges or hackathons. They can submit their ideas, they incentivize them, there is a lot of prizes, and they can also then be given budgets to actually build these kind of products. So I think internal innovation is something that will uh, continue to get more and more attention. um, and I think in terms of open innovation, I do feel that a lot more will happen in terms of what I was saying, leadership buy-in. So rather than, there is a term called innovation theater in the entire ecosystem, where,
Mm-hmm.
because innovation is a buzzword, we should have either some kind of innovation activities which are happening. But I think it needs to become part of the main strategy. So if as a what is my annual strategy or my 5-year strategy for my company, And I think the innovation strategy has to sit aligned with it, rather than just saying, let me build an innovation team, give them some budget, and let them run their own thing. I think the future, the main strategies of a company and innovation strategies will be more and more sort of has to become more synchronized. And I think there has to be a balance between what we call explore and exploit. So what people are still, the use cases I was telling you, people are saying that let us exploit what we have. So if we have like a great running system, can we make it more efficient? Can we run it faster? Can we run it cheaper? But we need to balance that with the explore part. Like, could I also then think about coming up with new products and services which may not completely be aligned with my core business? So how far from that core business, am I allowing my innovation to go? So this kind of, I mean, I think we have the foundation in place, we have the intent in place, but I think the maturity in open innovation will still come in the years as we look forward. And the innovation theater will become less and less dramatic, and we will have real kind of outcomes that we will see in the years to come.
Thank you, Meher, for sharing wonderful insights. I think we covered a lot. We actually demystified innovation and different contexts, and we actually you
Yeah.
shared on different contexts where each innovation and what it means, like open innovation, internal innovation, and corporate innovation. Thank you, Meher, for sharing that. Before we end this conversation, do you have anything to share as a closing comment, or if you feel we have missed out on anything, feel free to go ahead and express yourself.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about culture is the last thing. I
Sure.
think, future of whatever you were saying, I think you're trying to create a culture with, these kind of conversations that you're doing. There is a culture around the whole podcast and how should be people be talking. So I think a lot of whether you are an employee working in a large organization, whether you're a startup, whether you're a large corporate organization yourself, I think thinking about culture, thinking about how's the future of work going to be looking, and how does that really integrate into the culture of my company. I think that is something that we all need to be thinking about a lot more. And as employees, you need to also ask your managers and leaders, so what is the culture of this company? We really ask, like, what's going to be my salary? What are my benefits? What are my incentives? But you need to ask that question, what is the culture of this company? And have you really thought about it? Many people have a culture book, for example, and
Mm,
they really sort of evangelize that entire culture book a lot. So employees should demand that there should be a culture, and I think leaders should think about culture, and that's how we'll have amazing places to work, I think, in the future, especially because we have to work with young people and they're very demanding to work with in the
mm.
future. Yeah.
Yeah. So true, so true. Thank you for sharing that. Interestingly, we discussed that in the top 5 reasons why startups succeed. Everyone is aware about, of course, the business model, the idea itself, and of course the funding, which are the bottom three. Number one is timing, and the second one, where the culture part that you mentioned is the team. They both
Yes,
constitute more than 60% of a company's
absolutely.
success. Not only startup, but for that matter, any company's
Any
success.
companies,
So I
yes,
think
yes,
that is
yes.
so true. I see some of the job portals. I think Glassdoor or and Well Found. They are. I've seen their portals. They are having special let's say filters for culture flexibility, work culture flexibility. I see that
Hmm.
happening. So that's one
Yeah,
thing that came
yeah.
to my mind.
And some, I think when you're applying to a job, you can go to some of the websites of these companies, and sometimes they do have a specific page about culture, or their culture book is also available for you to download and understand.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we should demand cultures and create cultures both. That's my like last thing that I wanted to say.
Yeah. So thank you, Meher, for sharing all the wonderful insights. Thank you for giving me a cue. I think we can do one more podcast in a couple of months' time, specifically on culture, because that is also something that is very close to my heart, and
Yes.
we must do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, viewers, for tuning in and listening to the conversation. And I'm sure a lot of startup leaders or corporate leaders who are here, who have joined us today, have understood, have gained some popular and unpopular beliefs and gain some real insights and ground challenges, both from the startup side as well as for startups from the corporate side. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Saga, for having me. All the best.